When I look at it, people say, "Director, your surgical methods are old-fashioned."
I guess I'm getting old too. Now, when people say something is old-fashioned, I start to get annoyed. But what exactly is considered old-fashioned? Then how do I make it not old-fashioned? Should I make it in the shape of a star or something? Hello, I'm Dr. Woong Sang Kim, a certified plastic surgeon. To be honest, I haven't seen it myself directly, but I've heard about it from others. They say it's an old-fashioned surgical method. But what does it really mean to be old-fashioned? That's what I was thinking, but first of all, for those who are interested in the surgical method called under-eye fat repositioning, if you search for it, you'll notice there are a lot of confusing aspects. You might wonder why the surgical methods differ so much from hospital to hospital, and that's because there isn't just one way to do the surgery. The surgical method can vary depending on the approach taken. I think we should start by defining what dark circles actually are. When we talk about dark circles, we're generally referring to the darkness under the eyes. There are two main reasons why the area under the eyes appears dark. The first is that the skin color itself is dark. Let me say in advance, this is not something that can be treated with surgery at all. The second reason is shadowing. In one way or another, we always receive light from above. During the day, it's sunlight, and at night, it's artificial lighting. So if there's any kind of bulging structure under the eyes, it inevitably casts a shadow below it. Another cause, which is also related to shadowing, is that as we age, the so-called tear trough area loses fat, and the ligaments become looser, causing it to become hollowed out. In other words, a groove forms. When this happens, a dark shadow appears in that area as well, which makes us perceive it as a dark circle. As I just mentioned, I believe it's important to distinguish between the shadow caused by bulging under the eyes and the shadow caused by the hollowing of the tear trough. As you can sense from the word groove, it refers to a sunken mark, so the solution is to fill it in. However, if the shadow is caused by a bulge above, then it's not a groove, but a shadow created by the protrusion above, so the solution is to correct the bulging area itself. Therefore, in my opinion, when it comes to these two cases, we need to distinguish between whether we should correct the bulge or fill in the groove, and the surgical methods for each should be different. So what is the most crucial difference between these two surgical methods? Many people are curious about whether or not the ligament is cut during the procedure. To share my personal opinion, I believe that there is no tissue in our body that is unnecessary. Even the so-called tear trough ligament has its own function. There are various ligaments in our face, and their role is to hold the skin in place so that it doesn't sag when we are young. When these ligaments become loose and stretched, that's what causes skin aging and sagging. So in my opinion, cutting the tear trough ligament and performing fat grafting on young people is absolutely not an acceptable method. So then, what is the surgical method that I want to talk about? What appears in young people is not so much the tear trough, but rather the protruding fat above it. Why does this fat protrude? The structure that prevents the fat from coming out is the septum, but when this septum is loose from birth, the area under the eyes bulges out, and this is the main cause of dark circles in young people. Therefore, this fat should be relocated back into its original position inside the orbital bone. This is what we call repositioning, and securing the loosened septum is called septal fixation. In other words, the fat needs to be repositioned to its original place. When you look at the translation of the surgical term, the English expression actually sounds much cleaner. The surgery called repositioning and septal fixation is originally referred to in English as fat reposition. Next, the septum is called septum in Latin. When you use this as an adjective, it becomes septal, so it's called septal reset. It's just really neat. This surgical term really sticks in my mind. It means resetting the loose septum. It basically means just putting it back to its original state. For me, this surgical term has the clearest concept. For older people, the procedure involves cutting the ligament, and since the orbital fat has diminished and the tear trough area has become hollow, relocating the fat to this new area to fill it in. Of course, I'm not saying that this surgery is wrong. However, in my personal opinion, I firmly believe that the approach to improving the shadow, which I do not call a tear trough, in younger people should be distinguished from the method used to address the actual tear trough caused by aging in older individuals. I think it's difficult to judge whether any particular lower eyelid fat repositioning surgery method is right or wrong. Also, when it comes to what the patient wants, I believe that correcting dark circles caused by puffiness under the eyes in younger people falls more under the category of corrective surgery rather than cosmetic surgery. It's not a surgery to become prettier or look younger, but rather, why do I have puffiness under my eyes when others don't? It's a surgery to correct that issue. Of course, the final decision should be made after the patient consults with a doctor who specializes in this surgery. If the patient can get an answer that makes much more sense to them, I believe having the surgery with that doctor is the most reasonable approach. The dura mater is meant to be a barrier. Why do people keep trying to remove something that's supposed to block things? People don't change that quickly. And the surgical method called dural repositioning and fixation is not an outdated technique, but rather a very classical and fundamental approach.